Hey, it's Mike Henry with Follower of One, and today I have two guests with me. Let me bring them in. We have Roger Courville,
Hey,
CSP,
it's
who's
Mike
my
Henry with
partner
Follower of
in
One.
and
Uh,
Roger's my partner in the Here I Am show, which is what we're doing today. And Kris Castro PCC is joining us. Kris is a seminary student. In fact, Roger and Kris are both in seminary. But today we want to talk a little bit about the role of non-leaders in the faith and how people who are not in positions of leadership are used by God on a regular basis. And so, Roger, would you say hi, and then we'll get Kris on here.
Hey, welcome everybody. Roger Courville from Portland, Oregon. Five-time entrepreneur who just had a midlife crisis and decided to go back and get my doctorate. And I am glad to be here because it's a great topic. I don't care who you are. I think we're going to have something for you today.
Yeah. And Kris, thank you. Thanks, Roger. Kris, introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about you.
Hey everybody, I'm Kris Castro. I've been part of the Follower of One leadership team for a little while. Mike and I have done a couple of other podcasts together, but I'm really excited about today's topic because I love helping people see that they don't have to have the title of leader to be a leader. So it's going to be fun to talk about today.
Yeah. So thank you both for joining us. So this is all part of our experiment. If you're watching us live or listening to this on a podcast or something like that, shoot us a note to let us know, or you can comment on your live stream viewer of choice, where we should be live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn right now. And so please leave us a comment and let us know where you are and which network you're watching us on, if you're watching this at all. We're excited to pursue these different ideas that God has for us as we go forward. And so let's talk a little bit about the question. We were talking about this before we even got started recording, because we all have a little bit different perspective on this. So Kris, I'd like for you just to introduce your initial thoughts on this whole idea about the role of non-leaders in the faith.
Well, I think a lot of people, when they hear the word leader, they automatically think it comes with a title and things that they're in charge of. And I would suggest that it's got nothing to do with that and everything to do with capturing or catching a vision of something that you believe in or something that you want to happen, and you're walking in that direction. And as you meet like minded people or as you discuss where you're going, that you lock arms with people and you go towards it. Now, you are a leader in that moment because you're sharing your vision and you're asking people to come along.
Yeah. Yeah. Roger, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Just as I was listening to Kris, I was thinking, one, I agree. And how much variety there is with regard to how people define a leader. Me thinking like academic research. I mean, it's all over the map. It's kind of like everybody seems to know what a leader is, and yet nobody can define it. I like the way John Maxwell puts it, in part because I'm a certified John Maxwell leadership coach. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less, which of course is just a different way of saying what Kris just said.
No, yeah, we agree on this, right? But many people in your experience, have you come across friends who kind of say, "Well, I'm not you're supposed to be a leader or someone in a position of authority to speak up about your faith in the world or to do something with your faith in the world." I think many people even feel like they have to be a pastor or they shouldn't be talking about their faith anywhere but in church. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll jump in and then kick it over to Kris, because I can just imagine somebody sitting here because they clicked into the title and going, "Well,
Yeah.
wait a minute, I'm not a leader." Well, talk to me. And I think I'll just use myself as an example. I know one of the things that I had to grow through, particularly starting multiple companies, et cetera, was redefining what I thought a leader was. Like somehow that meant a certain level of status or influence, like a Twitter following or something like that, instead of going, no, I think if, to Kris's point earlier, if leadership is like just being somebody who steps out and invites someone else along, I am a leader, just in a different way than we might think of the president of the company or somebody who's got a massive following because they're a best-selling author or whatever that might be.
Yeah, Kris?
Yes, and I will say that, I think a lot of times mothers in general feel like if they don't work outside the home, that they're not leaders, that they're not important enough in terms of the marketplace. Well, you are leading your family. You have the most influential job in the world, because if you don't get that job right, the repercussions of that could go on for generations, right? And so leading, again, is simply catching a vision. And it doesn't matter if it's a family vision, a vision about a community. I mean, look at the news. How many people do you see that are average, normal people that are stepping up because they're either angry or upset or passionate about something? They don't have the title leader. They've simply caught a vision, regardless of whether anybody believes in it. They've caught a vision and they're asking people to come along.
No, I think that's a great point about the vision. I think the vision is a key factor, in fact. So talk a little bit more. Let's both talk. First, Kris, start a little bit more about this vision that you see, that someone sees. What's the vision that God's challenging us with? If we're a marketplace Christian, then, I mean, what vision are you talking about? I mean, most of my job is to just try and stay out of trouble until I get back to church on Sunday.
You're not doing your job right then, Mike. So I don't think it's a specific vision. In the relationship that we have with our Father and with Jesus and with Holy Spirit, it's a relationship and it's very individualized, which means that the Lord is going to be speaking to me about certain things, and he's going to be speaking to you and Roger about certain things. We may have some intersections in terms of our vision, but a lot of times it's individual. And Roger's in school for a specific reason, because God's been talking to him about his life and the things that he's going to be doing, and this is preparation for him. I'm in school because God told me certain things, and I'm in a preparation season for what God's got planned for me. In my part, I have no idea why. I simply said, yes, here I am. I'm going to move forward with this. I don't know why we're doing this, but okay. But I mean, I've caught that vision, and now people are walking alongside me. I tell everybody about what I'm doing. I share about my classes, and I invite people to, come along, not necessarily go back to school, but hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm seeing. Do you want to connect, and do you want to chat about it? That type of thing.
Yeah. Very cool. Roger, you have any thoughts along these lines?
Yeah, well, I'm still working through mom at home with the kids, because I mean, no truer words could be spoken. And I think there is a great example just there, right? Obviously we're here talking about how you show up at work or the marketplace, but there is a lesson in the point that Kris brought up that is a whole lot more near and dear or core to this idea of being a leader, which is like, you know what? I saw something that needed to get done and I stepped up and did it.
Yeah.
And when we think about, say, like the gifts of the Spirit or the fruit of the Spirit, with peace, patience, love, kindness, right? And what is part of Paul's argument there? That there's no law against this, right? I don't care who you are or where you're at. I don't care if it's legal or political or whatever at your office. you stepping up and being kind and patient and good and gentle is something that you can do, and that brings its own something to the table, I think, in a really powerful way. To me, if there's a core of where leadership starts, it's right there. Whether you think of yourself as a leader or not, you bring that to the table.
No, I think that's exactly right. In fact, I think often what we do is we use I'm not a leader, or somebody else will do it, right? It becomes oh, someone else will stop or someone else will help them. I'm looking for an excuse not to step into what I know needs to be done. So I think that happens sometimes as well. But let me flip it around a little bit too, because we've talked about this. So why do you think sometimes we also try and project our weekend experience into our workplace? Might that be part of the reason why we try and disqualify ourselves? Or is there something, let's talk about some of the things, maybe this is a better way to put this. Let's talk about some of the things that anybody can do. So what are the things that anyone can do if they're a believer in the workplace, whether they're in a position of leadership or not?
Well, let me start with that. I think trying to bring Sunday experience into Monday is the wrong way to start. I think it's got nothing to do with the experience and everything to do with who we are. If we are actually in a lifestyle of relationship with Jesus, then we are who we are everywhere we are, which means that when I'm at the grocery store, I'm the same person that's in the pew. I'm the same person that's walking around, and I'm the same person in my company. I run a company. I'm also in school. I'm everywhere. I'm the same. I'm listening for God's voice, and I'm doing what he tells me. And if he's not saying anything, then I'm just kind of being me. And that's a light in itself. If I'm doing it right in terms of my relationship with Jesus, I'm a light everywhere I go. Which I could get into trouble if I'm, not acting light-like at that moment.
Well, and that's, Roger, I'd love for you to speak about this too. There are times in my day when I'm not very light-like.
No. Oh, I am so busted. Just because I did a little bit of poking and I'm about to get out over my ski tips here, but the research in the world of leadership is long and varied, and there are some places of significant conflict. Meaning in the academy, one of those is what is the born versus made discussion, right? What is the trait of a leader? Can we identify them? And what's how can we develop, et cetera? But I think there's something interesting that we can learn. Shelley Kirkpatrick and Edwin Locke, a few decades ago now, actually went back and did a massive secondary analysis of leadership traits. And one thing that I thought was kind of interesting was the way that they looked at what they called leadership motivation, which was the desire to lead, but not to seek power as an end in itself. And I thought, boy, if there is anything that just kind of represents, in a way, the nature of what we as Christians should bring to our day jobs, there's one of them, right? Now, whether that's the desire to lead in terms of leading other people, to me is kind of irrelevant. But we live in a world that has nothing but power. We see the politics in our companies. We see the company, we see the problem in our world politically or whatever. And sometimes I think it's that, a good question to ask ourselves, particularly if we're not in a leadership role or we haven't thought of ourselves as a leader. When we are asking the question, how do I integrate my faith and my work, even if I'm not a leader? Maybe it's going, well, wait a minute. How do I bring influence to the table when power isn't in and of itself the end goal? In fact, I would argue that it shouldn't be the end goal. The question is really one of going, am I going to remind myself today that God's in charge, and regardless of what he's tasked me with doing today, I can do it with excellence. I can pray for my coworkers. I can do these other things that are part of arguably showing up from the neck up in a way that helps bring Jesus into your workplace, regardless of whether you're proselytizing at the water cooler or not.
Yeah, and showing up from the neck up, you've used that before when we've been talking. I think that's important. Kris, I like your analogy as well, right? We have this calling to just be conduits of our relationship with Jesus. That's one label I would have for what you had. How else would you call that? And how do we resist the temptation to try and create leverage or influence others or bring power into the conversation?
Well, one of the books that I read for a course this session was Andrew Murray's Humility, and he makes the point in that book that it all boils down to humility. Like, that's holiness, when you basically just lay down you and let Jesus shine through is kind of my take on that. And there is no power. Like, it's simply showing up every day. And in my day-to-day experience, I literally just kind of live my life. I don't grab power, but sometimes God gives it to me and I steward it well. Other times I have no power and I simply show up however I can in a situation or an experience.
Well, and I think that's a key point too, Kris. And part of the reason why one of the verses that I like to go back to about all of this is I think it's in 2 Corinthians 4. I don't have the verse in front of me, but he talks about how we're afflicted in every way but not crushed, perplexed but not despairing, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed. Is that 2 Corinthians 4 or 1 Corinthians 4? But he's talking about how we carry about in our mortal bodies this treasure that is our salvation. And it's all about Jesus, right? The salvation is about him. It's not about us anyway. And so I think sometimes I struggle with this wanting to be about Mike Henry instead of wanting it to be about Jesus. That's where I stop doing what he would have me do and stop being influential for him and stop, taking initiative on the right grounds. I don't know where I'm going with all that, except to say that, but like your humility, if we can get out of the way and just point to God, then we get to see Jesus and we get to see the answers that way. What are some other things that we need to think about the calling of a non-leader in today's workplace or today's marketplace? What can we do? What are some practical things that we can do? Roger, you got anything on mind? I'll start with you.
I was about to hit the tennis ball back to your side of the court, because not only do I recall you lead change group, but Mike's been a corporate executive for lots and lots of years, leading leaders. I'll throw this out. The Bible, of course, loves the imagery of shepherds and sheep, and none of us want to think of ourselves as a sheep. But I think it's biblical to say we are all both sheep and shepherds. And in Jeremiah 23, here's God talking. He says, "Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture." And to me, if there is one core thing that we can do integrating faith and work, it's just a simple question of going, wait a minute, am I building up or am I tearing down? And that passage actually goes on to talk about his promise of the righteous branch and ultimately the shepherd, right? The good shepherd. But interestingly, a couple verses later, he says, "Then I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I've driven them, and I will bring them back to their fold, and they shall be fruitful and multiply." Meaning at that point, he's talking about not just the shepherds, but the sheep, and saying, wait a minute, I'm going to bless the world through you.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just a lesson. Here's God going, wait a minute, are you building up or tearing down? And I think I think every one of us faces that every day.
That's a great point. Go tell us a little more. So what do we do as a response to that?
Kris, you want to take it, or you wanted me to keep on rolling since I'm looking at my Bible right here?
I can certainly take it. Well, what was coming to mind as Roger was talking is this image of a lion pride, where there's one lion king, and then, of course, he's a bunch of women that, and lots of offspring, right? But it's like that in the kingdom. Jesus is our king, and then all the rest of us are married to him because he's our bridegroom, gender aside. He's our bridegroom, everybody. And our job is to care for the community. And I did some research on lions once, and the lionesses, they all, as a pack, raise all of the cubs and they hunt together. Like, they do everything as a community. There is no lioness above any other lioness. It's just the king, like the head lion, right? And it should be that way in the kingdom, where we all look out for each other. We all go hunt and feed each other. We all take care of each other. It's that communal aspect, which in our individualized Western country is not so typical, which is another whole tangent I could get on.
Well, and I agree with you. I think the responsibility that we have and the leadership that we bring is stepping into the responsibility that we have, whatever it is. I think about, Jesus was watching them in Mark chapter 12. He was watching everyone put money into the treasury, and he calls out and tells everyone to pay attention to the widow who put in 2 coins because she put in all that she had to give. He was paying attention to the different things, right? He's paying attention to how we react in our circumstances and in our situations, not comparing us to each other, if that makes sense. And so I see that you talking about the lionesses, this idea of community is each of us finding our calling, our responsibility, the thing Jesus has for us to do, the vocation or the calling, and stepping into that. And when we step into that, we take a leadership responsibility, whether we have a position of leadership or not. Correct?
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit more about how we find that calling, or how we see what God wants us to do in every circumstance. Do you have any personal tips that you can give to some of the people listening or watching this video on how you hear Jesus? What are the things that you do to be watching for what Jesus has for you to do on a day-to-day basis?
Are you throwing that to Roger or me?
Both of you.
Roger, you want to start?
Well, if I start, we'll be here for 3 hours. So you take it.
Well, for me, I mean, I'm 53 years old, right? And it's just been within the last like 5 years or so that I've really connected to the Lord's voice. I've been a Christian my whole life, but it's been within the last 5 years or so that it's really come alive to me. And in that, it's been a series of faith risks, which means when I sense God saying something, I do it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But it's the faith risk of practice that helps me fine tune that, to go, is that really God? I'm going to find out. No, that may not have been him. But other times it's, oh my gosh, if I didn't do that, this wouldn't have happened. There's just miraculous stuff that happens when you say yes.
Yeah. Roger, what about you?
Are you ready for Jesus to get in your business?
Sure.
Here's something that is, I think, a less than popular message in a culture that is highly individualistic. if we look at the spiritual gifts in the Bible, right? Romans
Mm-hmm.
12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, one of them Peter's. God makes it pretty clear that our spiritual gifts actually are for other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that and I think this is borne out in like the sociological and philosophical background, academically from like Robert Bella and Charles Taylor. A big chunk of how we figure out who we are and that calling is in community. That's where our gifts are confirmed. That's where we learn and grow. And I think that's a little counter. There's to the common believe it and achieve it, and
Mm-hmm.
if you can conceive it you can achieve it kind of thing. And I don't think that's not that that's wrong, but I think the question is always one of understanding where I fit relative to God's authority. Here's another variation on that. Right after that, 1 Corinthians 12 is or after Romans 12, Romans 13 says something that we don't like, which talks about submission to authorities. And they're talking about, in a political governance sort of sense, saying, wait a minute, all authority comes from God. And how many times do we even look at going, sometimes I'm just going to shut up, do what the boss says, and do my work with excellence in a manner that brings glory to God, because I just, in a sense, submitted to authority. And there are none of us that are, we're all leaders and we're all followers, but I think it's often overlooked that followership is a form of expressing our faith at work.
Yeah, that's a great
And
point.
obviously, all theologians will tell you, we do that to the point there where they ask us to do something that God commands or forbid us to do something that God, did I just mix all that up? You know what I'm talking about, right? But I think just being a follower is itself a form of saying, wait a minute, I think there is a way to bring Jesus to the marketplace by virtue of how I build the team by doing my part.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you there. The challenge is trusting God, right? I always want to kind of work out the solution in my own mind, and then when Jesus doesn't make it work that way, I think it's wrong. Instead of trusting Jesus, Kris is better at this, trusting Him and doing whatever. I'm always trying to get God to line up with my own version of this.
Yep.
But
Yo, Jesus, here's what's happening. Are you coming?
exactly.
I'm so busted.
Exactly.
All right. We're going to turn it all over to Kris from here on, since clearly Mike and I are failures.
That's right.
Well, I read a book. Again, I've read a ton of books because of school. And there was another one about misreading scripture through Western eyes. And it really opened my eyes about the fact that scripture was never meant to be for individual use, it's for community use. Everything in scripture should be read from a we perspective. And then asking, well, how does that apply to my life? But it's we first, I second. And as I've been looking at scripture from that vantage point, it's been really neat to see the intersection of community with every single verse. This isn't just about me. This is about, my husband, my brother, my neighbor, my community, my everybody. It's about we, even if they don't believe, even if they're anti God, it's still about we. And how do I show up in a we mindset to glorify God in that moment?
Well, and we probably need to have a whole other live stream on the concept of we as a people, right? The entire human race, because we seem to be getting more and more divided all the time. Everyone seems to want to be their own boss and have their own say. We've all got our own opinions. We all are quick to share them in social media or wherever, or on the news. So the we kind of piece of this gets to be missing. But I agree with you, Kris. The calling then for the believer in the marketplace is to grab take part in whatever Jesus is doing there, to take off on the Henry Blackaby Claude King experiencing God model of looking around and finding what Jesus is doing and figuring out a way to join him in it. Right? I think that's back to the original conversation. How do you find out what God's doing? Praying and asking him and looking around and paying attention to the people that you interact with every day. Seems to me to be one good way to get started.
And there's always clues. You just have to be looking for them.
Yeah. So tell us about it. Tell us a story. Tell us about a time where you found one of those clues and took some action and what God did. Can either of you think of a time?
The other day I was walking, because what I try and do every day is take a walk around the neighborhood, because I work and do school from home. So I just leave and walk around the neighborhood. And one day I was walking by a school, and as I was walking through the parking lot, and I know God arranged this because I very rarely ever go this way, but I had to go this way this time.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was walking through the parking lot, passing all the parents trying to pick up their kids, the last car, as I walked by, I sensed the Lord say to me, "Go pray for her." And I was like, okay. So I turned around and walked over to the car, and I said, "Hey, sometimes I walk by people and God says to pray for you, like to pray for them. Is there something I can be praying for?" And she looked at me really weird. And then she said, "Well, I guess you could pray for my family or whatever." And so I said, okay. I said, "What's your name?" And she gave it to me, and I told her what my name was. And I said, "Well, let's pray," which caught another weird look because, I'm praying in public, like right next to her car. And so I prayed, and I didn't pray anything that I was thinking. I literally just was listening, like, what am I supposed to be praying for? So I prayed whatever came to mind, as long as it was edifying, encouraging, I prayed it. And when I got done, she looked at me with this thank you. Like I had touched her in a way that she wasn't expecting. And I don't know if anything that I said resonated exactly, because I prayed for a lot of different things, but she was touched and I knew I made her day. And I did that because God told me to. And what was the neat thing about the prayer that I started it out was, I said, "Lord, thank you that you have selected her name specifically to honor her today by asking me to pray for her because you saw her today."
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, I touched her. And that's what we're supposed to be doing, is making people feel, see, experience God through what we do.
Yeah. Roger, you think of a story or?
Actually, I was thinking about questions, rather than stories. I mean, because we could go on and on with stories, and I'm sure they're probably better than my questions. But I was literally just thinking about how we can bring light simply by being inquisitive, right? If the question here is how do we integrate our faith in our work, sometimes to Kris's point of just, wait a minute, following somebody's lead, maybe it's just asking how somebody's weekend went.
Yeah.
And say, tell me more.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation like that turn into something spiritual. And you don't have to proselytize. You just say, whoa, if you ask how their weekend went, what are they going to ask you? Well, they're probably going to ask how your weekend went.
Yeah.
Oh, I went to church and we barbecued, and maybe the door opens, maybe it doesn't, but you just planted a seed. But more importantly, one of the best ways to be interesting is to be interested.
Yeah.
And I think that, and the goal there isn't to be interesting as in building my own story or my own self-esteem, but some part of being interested in people and meeting them where they're at is being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I found too that if I will listen to people, and I feel bad because as old as I am, I still don't listen enough. I'm still way behind, years behind on listening. But listening to people and just listening for what's going on and trying to ask one or two more questions is always a great way to learn a little bit more about someone. And even if you feel awkward about asking to pray about them, praying for them after you've left or praying for them silently to yourself is still something that can be done, where you just I ask Jesus to show me what to pray for people and to show me what to do for people. And then he gives me ideas sometimes, Kris, like yours, where I offer to give someone a gift card for a lunch somewhere or something like that. There's always, I think God's always looking for ways to get us to serve and to give more, so that people might ask us, well, why are you doing this? And then we get to tell them, well, I'm doing it because I'm a Jesus follower and I felt like that's what he wanted me to do. And that may be enough of an introduction. I'm excited too, because the more I pray for people, I find that Jesus gets me to do or say things that don't make any sense to me, but they're impactful to the other person. And I find out about it later. Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, absolutely. I've had several times where I said something or did something, and somebody, it didn't make any sense to me, but I did it anyway. And I heard about what happened later or how it exactly meant something that was relevant to them. So,
Yeah.
yes, I've had that happen. And again, it all happened because I took a faith risk. I sensed I did.
Yeah. It's Go
Here's a
ahead, Roger.
story that, well, this is to me an amusing story, well, amusing to me, that is not directly about the workplace, but I think it could apply and just kind of undergirds what we're talking about here. So, I'm dating, and I had reached out to some gal, and she had come back to my profile more than once and had said hello. I'm like, all right, there's no connection there. And then I get this message from her, said, you know, I just wanted to give you a reply. You look like you're more religious than me, and I'm really mad at God for taking my husband still. And I think it's my dating ministry. So I just I hit reply and said, look, here's how to block your number if you call me. You don't even have to tell me your name, but if you ever just want to talk or pray, let me know. And I got back this, she hasn't called, but she got back this amazing response that was like it was the first time someone had been nice to her in 20 years or something. I don't know. And so part of Kris's bit about saying, how do I take a faith risk? In this case, I'm not even sure it wasn't terribly risky for me to just reach out and say, hey, I know I'm a total stranger. Maybe that's the right reason to talk to me. You don't even have to tell me your name, and here's how to block your number. But, that's the kind of thing that is under the surface everybody's carrying a bag of rocks on their back. The question is just what do your rocks look like versus what do my rocks look like? And sometimes just a show of kindness can be, and or take to Kris's point, and hers is a better story, but taking a moment to just put yourself there, you're probably asking a question they haven't gotten asked at work.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think paying attention to people at work, especially when we can make a few minutes, we can make some time when we're not in a rush like everyone else, and we're available to do whatever we can do. There are times, I think people are always carrying around some hurt or some challenges or things like that. And that's what I love most about being a believer is I believe that God has a job for me, regardless of my position or my occupation. What
Well,
other thoughts? Go ahead,
a,
Kris.
good- a good segue to what you just said is, well, what about the people that are seemingly unlovable? Right? The people we work with that we just there's a part of us that just wish they would get transferred. We wish they would like leave our work environment. Those people, if you think about it, are probably there because God wants you to be him for them. And they could be in your space so that you can just be nice to them or whatever it is that you're supposed to do in the midst of that challenge. So that's the other thing is we're always where are. We Let me rephrase that. We are planted in the marketplace with whoever we're planted with because there's a reason for us to be there, is my feeling.
Yes.
And I don't know about you and Roger, but take it from there.
I'm going to Budinsky here because I'm going to ask the two of you a question.
Okay.
And I'm going to start by just reiterating at least 4 things that I've jotted down here that are things that we can practically do. And then I'm going to ask the both of you this question, which is how I'm going to ask Mike this the question too. 1, build up versus tear down. 2, make your boss glad you showed up. 3, be interested. 4, take a faith risk. And I think undergirds this, even though we haven't said this, is giving yourself the margin to actually be able to be responsive or invite somebody to coffee or something like that. So here's my question for you. If you were to say, here is something you might actually go plan to learn, what would that be? If somebody, put another way, if somebody here is kind of convicted going, oh yeah, I think I can have an impact for the kingdom right here, right now. Well, where do I learn more? What are some of your favorite resources for going, besides reading the Bible and watching this live stream? What are some of your favorite resources for saying, hey, this book impacted me, or this passage, or what? And or maybe even what follower of one does.
Go ahead, Kris.
There are so many books out there that are relationship improvement type focuses, just how to love better, how to manage conflict better, how to do this better. But I think it really, again, all boils down to, are you managing yourself well first? Because if you don't manage yourself well, then you can't show up like Jesus would. And so it has to start internally. Your growth has to be internal first before it can be external, is kind of my thought around that. So work on the internal stuff and then the external stuff will show up.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. I want to say hi to our friend Bonnie, who joined, who's listening. Thanks for your comment, and glad to see you on here, Bonnie. Thanks very much. My you know what got me about that, Kris, is in all my struggles with walking with Jesus, I always feel like I'm too broke to do anything. And then I see an opportunity to step out and to trust Jesus, but I disqualify myself, and I'm using the air quotes a little bit, but you can't see it on my headshot here. I disqualify myself because I'm not who I should be. And what I'm learning is that there's great joy in stepping into the moment and doing the next. My code phrase for this is most godly response. So if I can come up with the most godly thing that I can do in any moment, I believe that's what Jesus has for me to do. There's no waiting until I get better, or waiting until I behaved better, or I wasn't a overeating selfish glutton last night, so I can't do anything today. That was my excuses when I was younger. But there's something for me to do in the moment. If I can step into that, then I get to experience Jesus. I get to walk with him and take part in what he has for me to do. I think, Roger, back to what you're talking about, the book Experiencing God made a big impact on my life. So did the workbook. I read My Utmost for His Highest every day because it's challenging to me. I've been reading it for years, and I read the Bible, and I love reading books and things like that. But the thing I've learned the most is it's in the trial and error. And that's kind of, this is a little plug for Follower of One, but that's why I like to think of Follower of One as the lab. We get to go practice there. That's a group where we try and help each other practice living our faith every day, practice doing this. And I'm blessed that I get to do it. I'm blessed that I get to take part in it, and it's been fun. But I've been a believer for 34 years, and most of my frustration of my career, the first 33 and a half of those years, the first 30 years for sure, was went into what it is today. It's just a struggle of learning how to be present with Jesus instead of getting all wrapped up in my circumstances or my excuses. So sorry for the little sermon there, but
no, let's keep sermonizing. No, you just made me think of something because, I've got a Bible reading podcast. I'm not even going to mention it, the name, because the goal here isn't promotion. But literally just reading through Galatians here recently, right? Paul's writing to the Galatian churches and talking about the Judaizers who were kind of coming in with this Jesus plus message, right? Okay, I've got Jesus saved me, but I've got to also do this. And how that's just kind of upside down, right? Yeah. And the difference, and to your point about sometimes feeling like I'm too broken or I just blew it and therefore I don't feel worthy. I call it preaching the gospel to myself.
Yeah.
As in, wait a minute, this doesn't say, okay, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven, but I got to get my life back in order before I can be useful to the kingdom. Is kind of like the Judaizers talking to the Galatians, as opposed to what Paul argues in chapter 3, which is like, whoa, no, wait a minute. Yeah. You are a child of God. You've been adopted into the family, and God sees you white as snow right here and right now. And now maybe your love response in gratitude, because if you understand the heinous of your sin, then you understand the beauty of his grace. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Once we figure that out, I'm never going to measure up. Therefore, I'm beautiful in Jesus, and go be your beautiful Jesus self.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember that sanctification is a lifelong process. It's not an overnight arrival. Like, it just, every day we get a little bit better, and sometimes we fail. But every day, if we're working on trying to be like Jesus, every day we're getting a little bit better. And even those seasons where maybe we have a crisis of faith, or there's a really bad brokenness season where life is just awful, I think it's part of the sanctification. You just get back on the horse and you do it again.
No, I agree with you. It was freeing for me to realize that there's something for me to do, and start to look for that, as opposed to trying to figure out what all rules I did or didn't keep and trying to keep score and all of those things. I just want to look at my circumstances. I'm in this workplace today. I have these things I have to do today. How can I do that in such a way that Jesus is present in all of it and that I'm listening to him? What does he have for me? And so that was the big changing point for me, was just beginning. And that's, I start with my prayer, right? It's what is behind this podcast title, or this live stream's title. Here I am, just telling God, okay, God, what do you want me to do next? So I agree. I think, Roger, those are great questions. I hope we turn more of these into podcast series or discussions or live streams on different topics like this. Kris, I'm grateful for you being involved in this with us. I want to take a minute and ask each of you to tell the world how they can find you. Because, and we will put this in the show notes, but I haven't done a very good job of getting all that in the show notes before this aired. So I'll get those in the show notes after this aired, but share about how people can contact you and connect with you. Kris, would you go first?
Sure. My website is begin2toshift.com. I am a leadership and trainer, coach, whatever, just basically I help people get to where they want to go. My favorite thing to do is help people align everything in their life and work with Jesus so that it all flows from one place and it just gets easier because of that alignment.
Exactly. Yeah. And Kris has a book, couple of books, correct?
I guess, but the last book that I put out is my favorite book. It's called Crazy Might Be a Blessing in Disguise. It's about my crazy adventure with the Lord across the country, where it was just an amazing trip because I didn't know where I was going every day until he told me. And Mike and I did a podcast way earlier. Like, I think it was last year we did a podcast
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. And we'll put a link to all that in the show notes as well. Roger, would you tell people how they can connect with you?
Well, certainly Roger at followerof1.com. If you want to send me a note, I do love and it's counted a privilege to serve with the team Follower of One. And I'm looking right at you. I'm looking right at the camera. I'm looking right at you. If you haven't ever thought about the idea of a marketplace mission trip, just come listen. Just the nature of hearing in community what happened in somebody else's life, even when your day was the most mundane and you didn't talk to anybody, is a beautiful thing. I also read the Bible into this microphone every single day at forthehope.org, forthehope.org. And it's a privilege to be here.
Yeah, it's a privilege to have you. And both Roger and Kris have been involved in Follower of One, and that's the sponsor of this live stream. It's followerofone.org, and you can check us out there. We have an online community where we connect with one another. We do the marketplace mission trips in the online community, and our goal now is to help everyone realize that we are full-time ministers in whatever job it is we have and whatever we're doing. Our job is to be a minister to serve other people so that Jesus becomes visible. I am grateful to both of you for being a part of this live stream and for being on here. Anything else you'd like to say in closing about? I would love for you to just give a parting shot to what you think people who think it's not their job, they're not a leader. What can they do next?
I
Roger,
think
would
they
you
should
go
show
ahead?
up for the
Go,
next.
go ahead, Kris.
I think they should show up for the next marketplace mission trip, like Roger said. The next one is October. What is
31st.
it? 31st.
31st.
And it's free. You sign up for it. It's a 2-week email experience. You can participate as much as you want or as little as you want. We've got group gatherings where we get to hear the stories Roger was telling about. And it's so much fun. And you learn so much about just kind of how to integrate your faith and work. Even if you never do anything with it, at least you get to learn it and practice it when you feel like it. Although we hope
Yes.
you use the mission trip as an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I know the title of this show was like 3 things that you can do to integrate faith and work, and we enumerated way more than that today. But I'll leave you with this one, which is a variation on what I used to tell my kids when they were little, and their version of Sunday morning was, "Dad, church is boring. I don't want to go to church," right? And you're trying to get them to do something, and I used to tell them this: your job today is to make one person glad they showed up to church. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I probably should do that in the office too. Make one other person glad they came to work today. So there's my parting shot.
That's a great point. Yeah, we probably should have summarized some of our bullet points. I'll put some notes in the comments, but yeah, I'm excited. We did talk about 3 things. I think being conscious and talking to Jesus and stepping into those promptings that we get, like Kris was talking about, when God prompts us to do something, because there's always work to be done, and just remembering that He's working in the life of every person there, and that we're all part of the same family. And if we can help those people feel better, to feel appreciated or glad they did what they did, like Roger said, those are all great ideas. Let's step out into the kingdom today or tomorrow or whenever you've heard this, and try and make a difference in the lives of the people around us so that Jesus might become visible. Thanks so much for listening to this live stream and taking part in this. I want to say goodbye to our friend Bonnie, who was watching and identified herself. Thank you. And to anyone else, check us out at followerofone.org. Thanks very much.